You've assembled an amazing team, smart people, experienced people, people who genuinely care. Their resumes are impressive, their intentions are good, and your strategy for the team is sound. And yet, the results never quite match the talent in the room. Meetings feel productive, but somehow nothing changes. Problems repeat themselves, innovation slows, frustration grows. No one can point to a single catastrophic failure, but instead it's death by 1,000 paper cuts, 1,000 invisible barriers, the conversations that never happen, the follow-up that never occurs, the parking lot that's never revisited, and the assumptions that nobody questions. You've been in that meeting where there's tension and everybody avoids it instead of addressing it. The systems that quietly reward the wrong behaviors. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Most high-performing teams don't hit their ceiling because of what they know. They hit it because of what they refuse to address. Today, we're exploring the hidden barriers that keep good teams from becoming great teams and great teams from becoming exceptional.
Bam. What a topic, Jeff. I've been that person, unfortunately. What made you choose this topic?
Well, I think what you just said is it, right? I've been that person. I think we've all been that person. And I think that it's just one of those things that I think sometimes we get tired. I don't have time for one more call. I don't have the effort or the energy to do it. I think if I address this, nothing is going to change. That feeling of apathy that resides in people. And I'm seeing this topic play out with clients time and again. And so I was like, you know what? Let's go ahead and let's make this an episode.
When you described this to me for the first time, what came to mind was waste. Like, what a waste of amazing hearts and minds and hands willing to do great things. And we lose the momentum, or we lose the opportunity, or we lose the sense of engagement and investment. And how far are we from making things right by closing a loop, addressing the unsaid hurt, forgiving the frustration, changing a behavior just enough so that the other person feels seen, heard, and valued? I just feel sad almost about the waste that we cause as leaders when we aren't able to identify and address these invisible barriers holding teams back. Do you have an example of one that comes to mind for you?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I have a perfect one. And I think this one will hit everybody listening. Everyone, I think, has participated in or participates in some sort of status update meeting. And when people show up unprepared. And so instead of being able to forward the action and move and progress, you constantly are rehashing the last thing that happens. And for me, there is this meeting, and for folks who have been in the military, they'll cringe when I say it, but every week there's a meeting on board a ship called Planning Board for Training. And it is supposed to be where you look at the schedule for the upcoming 3 or 4 weeks and really kind of lay out what happens. It is not necessarily a meeting where work should be done. It's where the confirmation of it happens, right? It's the final go brief. And instead, people show up unprepared. They haven't done the work ahead of time, and they go through the motions. And it devolves frequently into a thing of chaos. Sorry, I paused because I was trying to make sure I didn't slip into sailor talk. I was going to use colorful language.
I loved watching you do that reeling self in moment, and then you narrated it.
Instead of it catching it here, I caught it on the tip of my tongue. No, instead of it becoming a circus, it just evolves. And when it works, it's amazing. And when people do the work ahead of time, it's a very quick brief where it promotes alignment, it promotes synchronicity. And when it doesn't work, it ruins people's days. And I have a client who right now, their company does a similar meeting to make sure that they're on the same page. And I frequently hear from their associates that So-and-so, when they come and they give their updates, we don't believe a single thing they're telling us in terms of the updates.
Wow.
So then the meeting's a waste of time. And then people walk away annoyed that they've had an hour of their time wasted. And from a company perspective, assuming that there's 6 people in the meeting and you're paying them $50 an hour, you're just burning through money. That's man hours that are just wasted. And instead of moving forward, you're moving backward and you're adding little cuts, right? That death by 1,000 cuts to people's motivation, their will to succeed. This is something I've experienced personally. I see it on my clients, and really it goes down to what I refer to as GAF. Give, right?
And if you have an id-gaf situation and it multiplies over time, the waste compounds.
Absolutely.
And as you're describing this PB4T
yeah.
Meeting, boy, is that relevant to all of us in whatever industry or experience, even as kids. We all remember those group projects where there's a meeting scheduled at somebody's house and we get there and everybody's kind of look around like, okay, so what were we doing? And there's always that one person, and I bet I know who comes prepared, who did the work, who cared about the topic and imagined the impact that we could make. And the natural energy goes to that person. Do you know anyone who might have been like that?
I certainly was rarely that person. I was more the freewheeling, like freeloader who rolled in, like, what are we doing? I mean, when I was younger, like for high school projects, and then now I kind of try to, but again, you learn, right? You hate having your time wasted. That's probably one of my top 5 pet peeves is I hate having my time wasted. So if we're going to do it, let's do it. If we're not going to do it, don't do it.
See, what's the word when you say one thing?
Dissonance?
Dissonance between what we say we're here to do, PB4T, weekly status meeting for this important initiative that we all say that we're invested in, that what's on paper, and then what's really happened in terms of effort. My belief as a psychologist is the strongest barriers are rarely the ones that are standing directly in front of us. They're the ones we've stopped noticing. We just get on autopilot and show up to this meeting time and again, and I'll figure it out when I get there. Rhythm of disregard of intentional behavior or intentional investment can really become a habit. And there's research on psychological safety that shows that most of the powerful barriers that are inside teams are invisible. So examples: hierarchy, fear of appearing uninformed, personality dynamics, and authoritarian leadership. All of these are forces that determine who speaks, who gets questioned, and which problems remain hidden. So that habit forms. And what does it take, Jeff, to interrupt that habit if we get onto autopilot where we just show up and assume it'll get done in the moment?
It's a great question. And I think the answer really comes down to, I think, courage and care. You have to be brave enough to go against the system, right? To swim against the stream a little bit instead of going along to get along. You have to, somebody in the organization, if not multiple people in the organization, have to decide that enough is enough and we are going to live into our values, or at least be courageous enough to eliminate the dissonance that is occurring.
I've watched you address this when we've partnered on projects. How many times, and I'm guilty of this, do people show up and say, "Oh yeah, Jeff, didn't you make something for that purpose a while ago that we never got to?" And you calmly but deliberately say, "Yes, it's in your inbox. I'll put it at the top, or better yet, let me share my screen here." So you give grace, but how often does that erosion happen of trust and engagement when you see time and again that people aren't showing up and doing their part, or they're checked out in some way?
Yeah, So I appreciate the recognition. And I think that some of it, though, comes down to intentions and giving people the grace of recognizing, is this a well-meaning error, right?
Mm,
Is Susan just busy? She got a lot on her plate. So here, let me, right? And while this may have been number one on my priority list, it may have been number 15 on her priority list. So
hmm
I'm going to give grace. Or is this a pattern of behavior and a pattern of disregard? And I think that that's one of the things that the hidden motives that play into it and fuels the dissonance, right? If you are a part of a team where people are reliable, conscientious, and dependable, it's easy to say, "Yep, I worked on it. That got shuffled out of the priorities. Let me put it to the top of your inbox." But
mm,
if you're part of a team where everything's a crisis and you're playing whack-a-mole, where you get what I refer to as the fat kitten, right? The Friday afternoon tasker that gets dropped on your lap, right? Oh, here you go. Here's a kitten. Boom. Like, I don't want a kitten. What am I going to do? Boom. And it's like the crisis du jour, and then nothing comes of it. Then that can only happen a couple times before people start to give you less than their best. Well,
mm.
if you're not going to care about the work, and if what you're asking me about is not important to you, why am I going to put forth my best effort?
Truth bomb right there. And it gives me that feeling I've had in the past of I feel accountable to you as a colleague when I know that I'm causing that fatigue or that trust erosion. And I'm thinking about the updated trust equation that is making the rounds in leadership circles now. David Meister and Charles Green and Galford, a guy named Galford. They wrote a book, and it's called The Trust Equation. And if I remember it correctly, the way the trust equation works is that you have to have three things added, and then those are metered against self-orientation. So let's do the three. Credibility plus reliability plus intimacy, all divided by self-orientation. Let's break it down. Credibility. Do you know what you're talking about? Reliability asks, can I count on you? And note that one because that's what we're talking about today as an invisible barrier. And then finally, intimacy. Do I feel safe being honest with you? And that intimacy part is where when someone is unreliable, does someone feel safe enough to say, hey, Susan, it really was disappointing, let me down, I need you to show up. So those three pieces, credibility, reliability, and intimacy, all divided by self-orientation, which asks, is this about the team or is this about you? And what you're describing right now is a breach in reliability, whether it is someone who is typically reliable, but they let you down in a big way or 1,000 tiny cuts, or if it's someone who you know from experience that you can't rely on them at all. And those situations are a little more readily addressed because, oh, I know I can't count on this person, I'm not going to put my beans in the pot. But when it comes to someone that you either have to work with very closely or you're responsible for, you've invested in, or whom you need in order to achieve the objectives that you and your team have set out to address, that lack of reliability can be a spirit killer. And self-orientation on the bottom that we're dividing by is impacted by how much a person comes prepared, closes loops, follows through as they say they're going to do. Out of the trust equation, which of those stands out to you? Is it credibility? Is it reliability? Is it intimacy, meaning safe to tell your truth? Or is it self-orientation?
My initial reaction is self-orientation. And I'm thinking about that from the perspective of you can't control necessarily, as I'm talking myself out of it as I'm thinking about it. My first thought was whether or not people see you as credible is within a limited amount of your control. You may feel like you're presenting yourself as a credible partner. Whether people receive that or not, I think that's something different. Um, but I think self-orientation, like how you show up, how you communicate, how you put yourself in the orbit of those around you, I think is really, really important and can compensate for a lot of other things that could go wrong here.
With that in mind, I wrote us a haiku to get
Ooh.
ready for today. You inspired me so much with this topic. I've actually got two of them. I'm going to lay the first one out. Here we go. Ready? Walls without a sound. Silence shapes the room unseen. One truth opens doors.
Wow.
Inspiration behind that is, what do we do when either trust is breached because we've let someone down, or we let ourselves down and we're embarrassed, ashamed, avoiding? But also, what do we do when we have this habit of not noticing that we aren't showing up for each other, where we just show up to the PB4T and the habit is that we're just kind of phoning it in? How do we turn this around?
It's a great question. And I think the first step is to really orient. I think, again, right? So you orient. What are our priorities? I think that every now and again, you have to kind of like look at your systems. And is this helping us? And I distinctly remember the moment where I looked at the people in this meeting and I was like, how's everybody feel about this right now? As I'm watching everyone's faces. Well, this doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Well, nobody's ready. I was like, if you showed up for this meeting prepared today, please raise your hand.
Wow, what percentage of people?
3, maybe. Maybe 3 out of 25 people in the room raised their hand that they were prepared. Now, okay. A lot of things going on. But, that's what? Less than 10%? 10% maybe? It's kind of hard. So I think that's, you have to start with, is this serving us? Is this process we have in place working for us and creating space where people can be honest? Like, no, it's not working. It would be more helpful if this used to be beneficial. We've outgrown it. I don't know. How about for you?
That is a key word right there for me. Have we outgrown it? So our systems are set up to help us succeed, achieve, overcome, address. And those systems aren't necessarily built forever, but they become our habit. Shall we examine those systems on a periodic basis to see how they're working? Shall we disrupt those systems when they aren't working, or call people to account, including ourselves, when they aren't working? Because if you only have 10-ish% of people showing up prepared, what are those 10% feeling about the rest of the folks in the room? And what are the 90-ish% thinking and feeling about how they're showing up? And are they spending all their time trying to not look stupid or not look unprepared, and therefore just shoveling, not useful stuff out there? Versus here's where the intimacy part comes in, calling it what it is. The system isn't working. What is getting in the way? Well, the meeting is Monday morning, first thing. And I roll in from my kids' activities all weekend, and I haven't had time to prepare. That can be addressed. A slight tweak to the system. Let's make it a Tuesday afternoon, and suddenly we have a better chance of being successful. Versus, I'm not sure I really care about this initiative anymore. Or I have a beef with you that I haven't addressed. So every time I see your face, all I can think about is how you let me down, or you didn't show up, or you don't seem to care. These invisible barriers compound on top of each other, and suddenly they become where all the energy goes and drains within the room. And it reminds me again of one of my favorite books and concepts, Liz Wiseman's Multipliers, when she talks about how with a multiplier leader, everyone in the room gets smarter. With a diminisher leader, everyone in the room gets drained. Are we ever accidental diminishers in our best intent? Do we ever end up draining the oxygen out of the room because there's something unsaid or unaddressed that has gotten in the way of trust. I wonder what would happen if we did a trust litmus test every so often. And I've done this with my teams. You and I have been a part of these recently, where a simple anonymous moment to press the button to say, how are we doing in terms of being there for each other? Am I getting what I need from this team to be successful? How can we create safe opportunities to periodically test our systems and the investment that each of us has in those systems? What would you do if you or when you're leading a team and you're looking around and 3 out of 25 are saying they're involved? What's the remedy for this kind of a situation?
Handled this a few times, sometimes as a diminisher and sometimes as a multiplier. There have been times where I've gone full on Macho Man Randy Savage, screaming and throwing things and coming off the top rope with the proverbial steel chair and being like, fine, if you're not ready for the meeting at 2 o'clock, we'll do the meeting at 6 o'clock this evening. And then kind of squeeze in people to make it painful. I mean, that forces compliance, but it doesn't force investment or doesn't create investment. So I think that I've done that as a diminisher. I think as a multiplier, I've stopped and said, okay, what do we need to do to make this work? And then you give people space to do it. I think that that's important. I think in an ideal world, though, you want to create a system that is accountable to one another. And one of the things that I have noticed that stands in the way of creating that accountability, right? So as a leader, you can try to force accountability. No one's going home until this is done, right? I used to be able to do that in the military, right? I outrank you, I can tell you what to do, right? And I can drop the people's elbow. Okay, cool.
I can't stop seeing you with those glasses with the
Yeah. I got to get a pair of those. I have like Elvis glasses. I don't have Macho Man glasses, and I love Macho Man, so I need to get a pair of those. But I think you need to create a system where people are honest and not just nice. And I think people are afraid of not being nice to the detriment of being honest. Like, hey, we're not ready. Like, how cool could it be to the situation you described? You roll in late, something happened, life happened, doesn't matter. And you're like, I'm here physically, mentally, I'm not prepared for this meeting. And then you're able to give people the space to do that. Hey, can we reschedule? Maybe you can, maybe you can't. But I do think that that's a serious concern. And I would love to know your thoughts on that. How do we bridge the gap from being nice to being honest?
The difference between nice and kind. Nice focuses on preserving an appearance of cohesion. Kind focuses on getting to the root of the matter so that we can truly have that alignment. I took a risk with my current team. I remember the day, I remember the outfit I was wearing, and I went back and forth that morning about whether to do it or not. And you can hear how the story went. So my husband had to deal with something really serious. And, when it comes to health, that is the most important currency. Nothing else matters. You know what it's like when you're going along autopilot on your life and suddenly you've got a health situation. None of those meetings matter. None of those hurts in the workplace, those kinds of things. It all goes away. So we're dealing with this situation and I'm thinking, man, my team, I need to show up for them. I don't want to be distracted, but I also don't want to distract them with my personal stuff. So what do you do? And I'm relatively new to this team, but my heart told me, and throughout my life, this has rung true: be yourself and the rest will take care of itself. So I go into the team meeting and I said, I need to share something with you before we get started. My husband and I are dealing with a serious situation. Here's our plan. Here's our hope. So giving as much information as possible to set a realistic course of there's going to be some times when I'm going to be unavailable or distracted, and I'm asking for your grace in advance, but I'm also letting you know that I have confidence that we're both strong people at home. And importantly, this group is strong and we can move through this together. So I took that risk and I remember putting it out there and watching the faces in the room like, is this TMI? What's the culture? Is it okay to have a human life outside of the situation? But I did not want that invisible barrier of my worry about something and someone else besides what's in the room to become an accidental barrier in the moment. Grateful to tell you that not only did the team, and you know this very well because you're part of the moment, not only did the team respond kindly and with compassion, but there was a discernible shift in that moment in our team's investment in each other. I felt it investment in me, but I also felt it as an investment in we got you, we've got this. So I'm grateful to you for allowing a remedy to a fearful moment of an invisible barrier. It worked out really well.
And I appreciate you sharing that with the listener. And it's one of those things that in that moment, right, you created a space for us to support you. And I think that that's an area where when you think about, right, the difference between being kind and being honest, we could have been kind and been like, okay, but because you were honest with us and shared with us the gravity of your situation, you created a space for us where we could support you. And I think that that's kind of one of those wonderful things. I mean, imagine you're on a team that's trying to generate profits and you're accountable for something. The difference between walking in and I'm not going to give you the straightforward answer, or I'm going to walk in and say, guys, gals, team, friends, chuckleheads I'm forced to work with, whatever it may be, however you want to lump people together, I'm working on this. However, X, Y, and Z happened. This is where we are. This is where we need. I mean, I think we assume this perfect linear progression.
Yeah.
And when we are not honest, we discount the fact, right? There's this old chart that I saw, right? It's like, it's like progress and it shows this arrow like this. And it's like what progress actually is. And I love this because it's the dots spell out the F word. And it's like all over the place. Now, the linear regression ends up kind of up and to the right, but it shows like that you're all over the place. And I think that we forget that that's what it is. If you're a design engineer, you're going to be in the middle of designing something. Something's going to go wrong. You talked about, your Edison story all the time, right? Do you feel like a failure because you tried a gazillion times to make a light bulb? No. I discovered the 900,999 ways not to make a light bulb. And we discount that when we're not being honest and we're worried about being kind. I don't want to hurt Susan's feelings. I don't want to make the boss mad. I don't want to, whatever. Or when we assume the least generous interpretation or take the least generous interpretation instead of providing the most generous interpretation. Oh, they're a chucklehead. They didn't do their job. No idea of what's going on in their lives. And so who's at fault? The person who doesn't share honestly or the person who makes? I think that's actually a question I would love your perspective on. Who's worse in that situation? The person who's assuming the worst of their coworker or the coworker who is not self-orienting in a way that gives other people the opportunity to support them?
That feels like a confederacy of loss on both sides, a tragedy. And there's something in between the two people that creates this dynamic, but there's also something within each individual person that sustains that dynamic. We are constantly scanning our environment for threats, not just when we're in a combat situation or we're in an unknown situation, even in moments where we are with the people we love and care about. We have our baggage strapped securely to our back. And at any given moment, we're prepared to say, aha, I knew the world was terrible. I knew I didn't matter. I knew you didn't care. It's just how we're wired biologically, because over time, to survive, that threat scanning mechanism became the difference between being eaten by the lion or making it through another day. That silence between those two people is less often about courage than it is about calculation. That's going to sound really cold-hearted. Courage is the tool that we use to move forward in the situation, but calculation is the strategy that we are unconsciously or consciously using in any given moment to determine trust. People speak when the trust equation tells them it's safe. And if you have enough times where the least generous interpretation meets the most fearful guarding of the truth, you are going to constantly bang up against an invisible barrier. Somebody's got to give by putting themselves out there. And that takes me back to that day with you and our colleagues, where I enjoy being seen as reliable. I enjoy being seen as someone that you can count on for your problems, your needs. And so suddenly I'm putting my needs out there. And the answer could have been, we're not here to care. Not that anybody would ever be that cold-hearted to say we don't care, but really my service to my teammates is to help them succeed and remove barriers for them. So it's anathema to that goal for me to put myself into that equation. But the irony is, on that day, by letting self-orientation be a little higher and letting intimacy be a little higher, it allowed for credibility and reliability to be preserved. I want to know your answer to that thought. The question is, somebody who comes to the table with the least generous interpretation, in other words, assuming the worst about the other, versus somebody who comes to the table and isn't courageous to share their truth.
I think you're right that there's a shared responsibility there. What I want to say initially, that I think it's the person who's not being honest and transparent from the jump about what their role is. That's my gut reaction. Hey, if I don't come in and share with you what I'm up against, why would I ever expect you to be able to intuit that or assume that or whatever, right? It's not like we're walking around with a sign on us with a number that says, hey, I'm a 6 today. On a scale of 1 to 10, I'm only at a 6. And you've done that for us at meetings before, right? Where it's like, how's everybody showing up today? And, sometimes people are a 2, sometimes people are a 9. Sometimes people are, I always find, it's always neat when you watch people hedge, right? But so it's nice when you do that. How are you showing up right now? But I mean, how naive are we to assume that everybody is capable of giving us 100%, 100% of the time, right? That's a Carnot efficiency that is absolutely not at all possible. Like nothing is 100% efficient. That's never going to happen. But yet we assume that. So I think that there's a part of me that's like, if I don't share with you or my teammates what I'm up against, I'm setting the team up for failure. I'm somehow holding us back from the get-go. On the flip side to that, you used the word grace earlier. Shame on me for not offering grace to the person and not being curious and being like, hey, what's going on? You normally show up differently. And shame on me if your normality or your modus operandi is to show up as an unreliable teammate for me not addressing it with you. Mm. And so I think that there's shared responsibility, but I want to say it's maybe 60-40, 70-30, somewhere in there. The person who is not able to to live up to their commitments has a responsibility to honestly share. And I want to add in a different wrinkle. I think the leader has a responsibility. Whoever the leader is, whether it's by position or the person who is best suited based on the opportunity to influence the situation, to say, what's going on right now? why aren't we firing on all cylinders? What's happening? And I think there's three questions that every team should ask themselves routinely, right? What's the biggest barrier we're facing right now? I think teams should frequently stop and assess that. Weekly, monthly, quarterly. You can fill in the blank on what frequently is. I think then you should ask yourself, and if that barrier disappeared, what would we be able to do that we can't do right now?
Ah, imagine. Love
Yeah,
it.
right. And then I think the final question that everybody to get to that accountability piece is, what's my role in addressing it? If you're the leader, what's your role? How am I facilitating the success? As a member of the team, what's my role in addressing it? Do I need to show up 5 minutes earlier? Do I need to make sure that my slides are spell checked more appropriately, or that all the fonts are the same, or all the things that we worry about that are maybe not really important? Or do I just need to maybe add a little more gaff, right? A little extra give a to my effort? Or do I just need to stand up and say, that's on me. I told you Tuesday, it was harder than I thought it was. Here's where I'm at. I need 2 more days and I'll get it to you.
Mm. Yeah, you knocked me out a moment ago with being willing to address the issue. So the person who is coming in and creating the tension, or being unreliable, or for whatever reason, I'm having feelings about your performance or your attitude, or how you're showing up. If I don't do something about that, I'm a co-conspirator in that dysfunction. But to your point, the leader with positional authority or influence authority, sometimes social referencing authority is far greater than positional authority, but either way, it's power. How we use that power in the moment to identify, address, make it safe. I believe that the greatest power we have as leaders, as managers, is in creating safety
I would
for
agree with that.
others. And when we don't exercise that power, that gift to create safety, either for ourselves to speak up, for others to speak up, we are sending a message about how interested we are in the truth of the matter underneath the iceberg, or do we just want to paint it pretty and keep on rolling? Too often, I think managers unknowingly, or maybe even in certain cases knowingly, say, I don't want to know what's under the surface. I don't want to go there. I've got my initiatives. I've got my mission here, and your job is to fulfill that mission. And I'm not really interested in the person underneath. And we all know that adult learners, employees, or as entrepreneurs, unless we feel seen, heard, and valued, you're never going to get the best out of us. Kids are the same way, but they do it much more honestly and emotively in the moment. I wish I could go back to the kid part of me that would just say, "Hey, this doesn't feel good. I don't feel included. What's going on?" That wouldn't that be beautiful to address things more quickly? So a second haiku is very timely for that very topic that you just shared. And I wrote, "Truth waits at the door. Trust decides if it enters. Leaders turn the key."
I love that. Please put that in the comments when we
I
post this.
will.
I think that's incredible. And in episode 14, when we talked about psychological safety, right? I used to think that psychological safety was hokum. I was like, get out of here with your melting snowflake nonsense. Like, I'm not interested, and I used to, I thought it was cheeky and sarcastic to be like, the beatings will continue to morale improves. I'm not gonna lie, I kind of bought into that at times. Then when you think about it, right, that is 100% diminisher behavior, but it also does not help forward the action, and it doesn't create the environment. And when people don't feel like that safety really matters, and it is so easy to create, It is so easy to create in the sense of leading with curiosity. Hey, what's going on? You said X, we're at Y. What happened? And what I would tell leaders is if you default to maybe slightly more authoritarian responses, you can always be stronger and more stern later. But once you have led with that intensity, you can seldom, if ever, dial it back down to a more curious kind approach. So create the safety, find out what's happening, right? If you're teammates and you're working towards a shared objective, why wouldn't you work to remove the barrier, right? What's my role in addressing this? What's the thing you're up against? And one of the things I think that most people deal with, and you may have seen it, it was rampant in the military, and I see it in some of the organizations I work with now, is this manufactured pressure. He said he wants it Thursday. Okay, did anybody ask why Thursday? Hey, you've asked me Thursday, and I can do Thursday, but if I do Thursday, A, B, and C are going to fall off my plate. You still want it Thursday? Is it really important, or is it pseudo important? And so there's this manufactured pressure, like, oh my God. And in the Navy, they used to do this all the time. The admiral wants it. Does he though? Does he? Are you sure? Are you sure that's what she wants? And a couple times people did that, and I'm like, his aide's my good friend. And I'd shoot an email, and then I would come back and I'd forward the email. I'll have it to you on Thursday. Get away from me with this Tuesday nonsense, right? Or yeah, he has to have it. Cool. So are we manufacturing pressure? Is it real pressure? How are we communicating? But safety is real, and it makes a difference. And if we're all on the same team, why shouldn't we be able to feel safe enough to be like, what are we trying to accomplish? What's really happening? Why is this important?
Jeff, I loved your 3 questions. And my favorite of those 3 questions was, what is my role in this? Here's a dynamic that you and I share that I didn't even realize was part of the safety equation until you were just speaking. Every once in a while, you will say to me, how you doing? Not, hey, how you doing? But how you doing? And I know what that means. It means I see you. Something isn't, you're not yourself, or I can tell you're under stress, or you're acting like a clown, whatever. You give me that signal that the way I'm showing up is not consistent with being okay. And what you know me well enough now to know what okay is and what isn't at a very subtle level. And that's awesome that you do that. But there's something you do after that that's even more important to me. When I'm not okay, and you help me realize that I'm showing up, I'm not masking it as well as I think I am, or giving me a safe space to just not be okay for the moment. That's awesome when I'm not okay. But the part that really builds trust with me is when I am okay, and I say, oh, am I showing up weird? No, everything's great. And you are able to either return trust or kind of be okay, and we move forward to the next thing. You don't stay there and say, I know you're not telling me the truth. You afford me the gift of truth that I'm showing up differently, or like it seems like I'm not okay, or maybe I'm being rude unintentionally. But then you give me the second gift, which is more important to me even than that one, which is trusting my response. Because now you've created the conditions for safety by saying, you okay? But you've maintained the conditions for safety, like this moment of pausing, using your pause acronym, pausing in the moment to call out where we are. In therapy, in psychology, they call this immediacy. The concept of immediacy means I'm going to pause the action of the content of what we're talking about to address the process of how we're talking. many couples get stuck in this where they fight over the content of whether you said it right or whether you whether you did in fact take out the trash on time or not. Like they get caught in the content instead of the tone of how you're speaking to me or the pattern of how we're showing up for each other. So immediacy is a super powerful tool that leaders can use to pause the content of the moment and address the process of the moment.
And it reminds me of the acronym TEAM. Together, everyone achieves more. And if you don't take the moment to address the process that is contributing to the togetherness or the achievement, then you're not contributing, and you're doing your team an injustice, and you're contributing to the barriers that are in place. And that pause and that immediacy and that addressing the process, I think is the right. That with those three questions, I think is how you do this, right? You stop. Hey, we're not firing all cylinders. What's going on? What's happening? Being curious, being able to address what's happening, and reminding yourselves that we are in fact a team. Why is this adversarial? And it's one of the things that when I think about some of the shortcomings I had when I led teams or when I'm working with leaders who are leading teams, I'm like, if those are your people and you take pride in leading them, why aren't either A, you taking full accountability for the things that are not going well, or B, why aren't you addressing your role in getting everything working together, right? It's like a mechanic whose car doesn't run. You have the skill sets. Why aren't you fixing the engine? Why aren't you getting the timing belt or the timing on the engine right?
Powerful, and a tip for our listener to stay curious a little longer. As you said earlier, try to suspend judgment. You can't eliminate judgment because sometimes it happens automatically, but you can suspend it long enough so that you can create space for the person to show up or get the grace that you want to afford them. But here's the tip: how you show up after addressing the process matters as much as how you address the process in the first place. You are an example of this for me. I did something that wasn't cool. I didn't realize it, but you pointed it, you said, hey, I didn't feel great. I didn't like how that went. And in that moment, first of all, I felt trusted that you would say that. I hope it's okay for me to bring this up. Okay, listener, I just talk about damaging credibility and reliability. What are you talking about, Hendrich? Anyway, you addressed it with me in the moment, and you allowed me to analyze where do I fit with this. You're right, I did do that, and it was not intentional, but nonetheless, intent doesn't matter if impact is damaging. But it's how you treated me afterward that mattered. Because the courage to speak up is awesome, but often the second arrow becomes, and I'm going to punish you for the next 3 weeks and not speak to you. You came back to me and treated me with kindness and respect, which you always do, but like you let me back in, if you will, to the circle of connectivity with you, instead of, man, that was a bummer. And there may be a time when I step on a line by accident and it takes more time than that. I'm not saying you have to be immediately okay with the other person, but the signal of you still matter is a powerful one. So as we end for this week, I am grateful for the space that you've held for us to talk about this very important topic of invisible barriers. And I invite our listener to tell us an example of a courageous moment that you've taken to identify and address an invisible barrier. I'm Susan Hendrich.
And I'm Jeff Servello. And remember, as we wrap up this week, it's not high-performing teams don't falter. It's what they do to recover when they do.
What an awesome topic for Imperfect, Better After Broken, the show where we celebrate the cracks, the scars, and the stories that make us stronger. Hope you'll join us next time and every week at 6 p.m. right here on Sand Castle Radio, America's hottest online variety and music station. Jeff, you're the real deal. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. To see if he wants to come on the show.
Oh my God, dude, you are like the mayor of cool people. Yes.
Oh, I don't know about that.